Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We are rejoined by a fun guest who I'm always happy to chat with. He is one of the top players and trainers in Poland. He's worked with the Polish youth national team. He's also worked with IM Levy Rozman, as we have discussed in prior conversations. He's also written two great chess exercise books that are both on my recommended book page, Universal Chess Training and Supreme Chess Understanding. He's now out with his first Chessable course, which is called Calculate Like a Beast, the Moranda Method, which reveals that his identity is Grandmaster Wojciech Moranda, and I'm pleased to welcome him back. Welcome, Wojciech.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to catch up. I've been diving into your Chessable course, so it's first things I want to say are it's excellent and it's challenging. So I want listeners to know that this is not going to be a walk in the park. This is also true of Wojciech's books. He's a very high-level trainer, works with a lot of very ambitious players. So I want people to know that going in. But beyond that, it's filled with fantastic advice and really original puzzles, really a lot of puzzles that have unexpected solutions and can be quite fruitful for your chess, I think, especially if you're above, say, like 1,700 FIDE level. But the advice that we discussed today and that's shared in the course, I think, is pretty universal. So I think that we should start, as you did in your course, Wojciech, and define calculation. What does it mean? You know, we always talk about it, but what does it actually mean?
Yeah, so calculation is essentially the ability to predict a sequence of a couple of moves forward, both for yourself and for your opponent. You do want to make sure that those predictions of yours are accurate in the sense that they're supposed to be the best moves for both of the players, because that is one of the worst feelings ever for chess players to calculate, let's say, a forced line 4, 5, 6 moves ahead, and all of a sudden somewhere along the way as of move 4 an unexpected move happens on the board, even if it turns out not to represent any danger for you. It's always like an unpleasant feeling, like this kind of cold sweat going down your back, when you stumble upon something completely unexpected in your calculations. Essentially, what motivated me to write a course like this exactly was the fact that there's a lot of very nice material available on the chess market in terms of like training calculation. On the other hand, I got the impression that the knowledge is like disorganized, scattered between different kind of sources, but sometimes also I would stumble upon quite a lot of misleading advice, and I decided to put everything together, like everything that I know about calculation, and for the sake of improving the general level of the chess populace in terms of calculation, I decided exactly to prepare work like this. And so far, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. As you said, as difficult as it is, challenging, and this was exactly my goal, since I wasn't really sure what to expect from the Chessable community before I started writing. It turned out like just fantastic. My experience so far has been, it's exceeded all of my expectations, to be honest. But one thing was for sure, I wanted to provide a lot of quality, and so far I think that I managed. I handled it, right? But obviously, most titled players who came back to me with feedback, they were like absolutely elated, which made me very happy. Then again, I do understand why some maybe lower-rated players, why they find at least some of those puzzles to be particularly difficult. And this is also why maybe we're going to have an opportunity to speak about it later on as well. This is also why I'm in the middle of creating a so-called bonus chapter, especially dedicated to those players who are rated below 1800 FIDE. So that I could also try to accommodate their requests, to fulfill their requests for material specifically targeting players of their caliber.
Okay, yeah, sounds great, and yeah, I echo the praise that you've received. But I wanted to follow up, Wojciech, on something that you've said both in our prior conversations and that you say in your course, which is that you feel that there's a lot of bad advice given regarding calculation. Could you elaborate on that? What bad advice do you hear given?
Well, I spoke about it a lot in the introduction to my course. So on one hand, you get a lot of advice passed, from player to player by different coaches who, for example, like the most striking piece of misleading advice that I can think of, like from the top of my head, is essentially that doing a lot of tactical puzzles is gonna benefit your calculation skills. To a certain degree, that is true. But I think that it's like trying to cure influenza with vitamin C. Even if those are like high doses of vitamin C, you might want to like consult another specialist, I guess, if you want to emerge, healthy out of this kind of a chess illness. But speaking more directly, I think that many people in general perplex tactics and calculation, and it's very easy for me to believe that there are going to be lots of players out there who do not really know a different way of training calculation than exactly to do tons and tons of tactical puzzles. Also, it's about the methods used by players if they want to get better at calculation. Overall, personally, I've heard a lot of very experienced players claim that if you want to get better at calculation, you might want to do a deep dive into endgame studies. And as much as I agree with the statement in general that endgame studies are helpful if they're selected properly, the problem is that this is like not the only method of training calculation, and also that those puzzles, those endgame studies, they do need to fulfill a lot of other important criteria. Many coaches do not really speak about so much, and those criteria I tried to formulate them, explicitly in the introduction to my course as well. Finally, we've got some pieces of advice that are generally very helpful. It's just that people sometimes interpret it in a mistaken way. And I did also quote an example or two in the introduction, as mentioned, to my course, and I think that those are like the things that really needed to be highlighted for starters. Many viewers or customers of users of Chessable were particularly thankful for for quite a vast introduction into the topic, which was 2 hours long. But I felt that I needed to explain everything up front before we dive into serious calculation training, the way how I see it, that it should be like for just about anybody. I mean, in a way that would benefit just about everybody, since my method of training calculation is exactly based on one hand on the skills that you need to possess if you want to be great at calculation, and on the other hand on the construction of the calculation process itself.
Yeah, and to follow up on what we were saying about the difference between calculation and tactics, correct me if I'm wrong, Wojciech, but one of your sort of primary tenets is that all tactics involve calculation, but all calculation does not involve tactics. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes. So, well, there can be variations which you're going to need to calculate. And actually, every single game of yours will involve some lines which need to be calculated, but they have like absolutely nothing to do with tactics, right? Then again, there are going to be variations which are going to involve tactical motifs like skewers, x-rays, decoy, deflection, etc. It's just that they appear on the board like within the calculation process. I wouldn't say as a coincidence, but I would actually say that those cases are like a minority. And if you train calculation skills exclusively based on tactical puzzles, well, your tactical vision, specifically speaking, is going to improve for sure, because you're going to be able to recognize all of those tactical patterns relatively easily. Then again, I can imagine that statistically speaking, 80% of the variations that you calculate in your games are not tactical at all. So, like, what about the other 80%? Like, what about what kind of method are you supposed to use in order to exactly train the other 80% of the calculation process of yours, which is sort of stripped, from those tactical patterns?
Okay. And Wojciech, in addition to, like you say, 2 hours of intro, which is very very comprehensive, and then you get to a bunch of different puzzle sections, and then you have a very helpful Q&A section at the end where you just kind of answer calculation FAQs, some of which I think might be helpful to touch upon here. And one of them was the oft-asked but tough to answer question of when to stop calculating within a sequence. What advice can you offer there?
So essentially, every single case is different in the sense that there are going to be lines where, well, you're supposed to calculate for 5-6 moves ahead, and there is no other choice since the line is pretty much forced. Then again, there are going to be situations in which you barely need to calculate beyond move 2 or 3. And even when doing so, you're just probably verifying the tactical soundness of the given line. That is, you're just making sure that you're not dropping any material as a result of the move that you have chosen to play. So the sharper the position is, typically the deeper you need to calculate. If the position is like strategic in nature, essentially calculation is gonna be fulfilling the role of a blunder check to the extent that you're just gonna be, again, verifying the tactical soundness of the move, of the general strategic idea that you're pursuing by playing a given move this way.
Okay. And for listeners, myself included, who obviously the farther we go, the murkier our vision gets. And generally, people might struggle to keep the position in their head as they try to work through a bunch of lines. Obviously, this is a situation where there's no substitute for practice. But do you have any other advice for people who have trouble picturing, like retaining a position in their head as they calculate?
Mm-hmm. So what you're probably referring to is, strictly speaking, visualization training and not so much calculation training. I think that visualization training should serve as a predecessor for serious calculation training, because, well, if you cannot visualize what is happening on the board, how the board looks like after move 2 or 3 of the calculated line, well, the calculation training of yours, no matter how serious it is, may not yield those effects, the ones that you really expect. So there are different types of methods when it goes for visualization training, starting from like the simplest ones. For example, imagine a board in front of you and somebody randomly asks you about the color of a given square. So that is visualization training 101, right? So somebody says E5, you're supposed to instantly respond with dark square, C4, light square, right? Then players who are like 1200 rated, let's say, they can continue by visualizing movements of different pieces blindfold across the board. So let's say bishop from f1 via c4 to g8 and then h7, or how many moves was that? How many squares did the bishop cross? And as long as the player is capable of remembering and repeating the route of the piece. For bishops, it's relatively easy. For knights, it can get trickier, obviously. It's totally fine. Then we move on to even tougher exercises. So, for example, you set up randomly a couple of pieces on the board. Let's say the knight on f3, a bishop of white on c5, a queen on d7, and the rook on g4. And then the questions follow. Namely, which squares are attacked and which are not. Yeah, so as you can tell, this is already starting to feel a little bit more complicated, and even grandmasters may struggle a little bit trying to enumerate all of the squares that are controlled or maybe not, and how many of those squares are controlled twice. On top of that, that's a completely different question as well. So this is like for starters, but visualization training, I do not touch upon it in my course too much for a simple reason, namely, this is a type of a training that players until the level of 1500 maybe FIDE should be doing on a regular basis. Beyond that point, beyond that threshold, I think nobody should be experiencing difficulties like these, at least not within like a line that is 2 or 3 moves long. Yeah, okay, there are some situations in which even grandmasters are going to start losing track of what is happening on the board. Then again, if you ever watch those, big guns, how they behave at the board, like if you ever watch like live broadcasts and, with cameras on, etc., if they're like calculating a very, very deep, long line, essentially they're sometimes barely even looking at the board because they're so far ahead in their calculation process that the board would actually be disturbing them because it's like square one for them, right? Whereas they're already like 5-6 moves ahead, so they're looking at literally everything else than the board, like the ceiling, the floor, outside of the window, right? It's like a typical kind of sight at those super strong GM tournaments.
But so I definitely get what you're saying, and I agree that like below the 1500 level, it's good to consciously work on building your visualization skills. I've recommended in the past. I think the Step 2 Thinking Ahead book is a fantastic resource. It asks a lot of the questions of the type that Wojciech was mentioning, where it might just give you a handful of pieces and tell you that they're, these pieces are on this. These squares, and there's a checkmate in one or something like that. So you have to picture the entire board. But then when you get past that level, I don't think that people's visualization issues disappear. They just become less pronounced. So do you think that beyond that level, one should still be doing visualization work? Or is that a case where in order to get better at calculation, if you might start to lose the position, as you say, the more moves you go, the hazier it might become. Is it just practicing calculation and playing a lot? Or is there still visualization work to do beyond that general, roughly 1500 level?
Well, I would risk the statement that if you can visualize the board, or maybe you find it difficult to imagine like where the piece is standing after you've made like 2-3 moves with it, well, you're not going to reach 1500 in the first place. Obviously, I have had students of all playing streams, also those who are like approximately 1500 FIDE rated, and they would report different types of issues pertaining to visualization specifically to me. I had this one student who said that he didn't view the board as a whole, but he would visualize the board in quarters for some strange reason. So instead of like all the way diagonally from A1 to H8, he would be dividing the board into like 4 separate equal squares which were equal in size. And for some strange reason, when something was happening on the, in the lower left quadrant, he would be totally forgetting about the upper right one. Yeah, so that is something that is like a basic situation to be dealt with, and in such cases, visualization training is absolutely indispensable. On a higher level, however, visualization training takes rather the shape and form of playing blindfold games, I guess, right? So, I've been always enjoying blindfold, but I also know a couple of title players who somehow find it particularly difficult to play chess without looking at the board at the same time. I particularly love blindfold blitz, right?
Wow.
So, obviously, when I'm not looking at the board, I'm going to need some assistance from a helper, like a person who executes the move instead of me. On the other hand, it's like fun. It's like it gives me a nice adrenaline or dopamine rush also when I get an opportunity to play like this. I even had this exhibition type of event that I participated in a while ago. I was supposed to attend the Polish Amateur Chess Championships as a guest of honor. It was like very nice, a great event, which at least before the pandemic was taking place like annually, right? And the organizers only told me that I'm supposed to play a blitz game blindfold against the eventual victor. And I'm not going to be looking at the board, but he is going to be looking at the board. He's going to be sitting at the board and executing the moves himself. Little did I know that the championships got won by an IM. and I was supposed to play blindfolded. I mean, he was not blindfolded, obviously, and against an IM. But I managed to win in a time scramble, which is nice, obviously. But like surprises like these sometimes happen. I mean, for like bottom line would be that for high-rated players, those basic visualization training methods may already be a little bit too simple. So what remains to be done is maybe trying to play blindfold online. Maybe I think that leeches.org, the platform, allows something like this to be done, that you can just use the settings to not see the board or even the score sheet at all when you're playing. And if this is not yet enough for you, I guess that you can try and give like some simultaneous exhibitions a try, that you're playing like on two boards simultaneously as the simultanist, essentially, right? Okay.
Now, obviously, again, like your ability is far beyond what most people listening will be able to do. Like most of us are happy if we can play a blindfold game at all, A, and B, like without hanging a piece. So blitz is like another, that's another level, but certainly your advice of practice makes perfect, makes sense. And Wojciech, so on the calculation advice, again, there's so much stuff in this course and we can't get to it all, but I did think it might be helpful going briefly through, because you kind of set forth your own vocabulary in the course. I mean, some of these terms I'm familiar with, but not necessarily all within a comprehensive framework. So I thought it might be helpful to just quickly go through what you call the 5 elements of calculation, and you could describe them briefly for our listeners. So number 1 is vision and perceptivity.
Exactly. So I've been thinking about this method of mine for many years now, since whatever like I do, this is always based on my experiences with my students, also the experiences of my own in training or, like in competition. And whenever I, start any kind of cooperation with a student of mine, you first of all need to like determine their strengths and weaknesses, and then also like the optimal way of method of carrying on, like how to cut the learning curve, as quickly and effectively as possible for them. And I would be, like working with a lot of students who were struggling at calculation. And this is something that motivated me already a while ago, like years ago, to start thinking about this, trying to construct something that may represent a universal calculation training method, as was the case with my first book titled Universal Chess Training. Actually, the title should be, with the benefit of hindsight nowadays, I would have titled it Universal Strategy Training, since it contained advice on how to like construct your own daily strategy training by dividing the material into 5 positional elements that would be problematized in the 5 puzzle sets. So I decided to create something similar for calculation. It's like a 5-tier type of a method. As mentioned before, it's based on one hand on the skills that you need to possess if you want to be good at calculation, and on the other hand on the construction of the calculation process, and therefore also the typical problems that you're going to be encountering while calculating variations in your own games. So it all starts with vision and perceptivity. Vision is the ability to see that a resource, whether it's tactical or non-tactical, whether it's possible at all or not. So the difference between vision and tactical vision is that the latter pertains to the ability to spotting tactical patterns, the ones that I have mentioned, like interference, decoy, deflection, etc. While sometimes vision is not going to have anything to do with tactics, as mentioned earlier, because it's just about spotting the possibility to play a move as well as the underlying idea behind it, right? Whereas perceptivity is a little bit different, in the sense that it pertains to, it's all about the ability to spot moves that typically tend to escape the attention of a human player. So for an engine, everything is simple, while for us humans, sometimes we're going to find it psychologically difficult to, to leave a piece on prey, under attack, right? We're going to instinctively be trying to remove it from the attacked square. Also, there are some typical piece maneuvers that like a lot of players struggle with. I have some friends who are GMs, and they always, they very often report to me that they find backward knight moves very difficult to spot. And the origin of this mistake, I find it very difficult to determine. So that's like the first kind of pillar of my training method, and therefore every single exercise within every single set that my students get from me when we start training calculation, well, it is exactly about one of those two skills, but they go hand in hand with one another. They both pertain to like the broadly understood, interpreted vision.
Yeah, and there certainly are some positions where the challenge is just seeing the move at all. The challenge is just considering the move. It might be on the first move. Like Wojciech sent me some sample problems that we're going to make a separate quick video about that listeners should tune in, and not to spoil too much, but yeah, one of those kind of blew my mind. It's one of those where like you could be staring at it for half an hour and you might not look at this move, even though it's the first move. And moving on from vision and perceptivity, number 2 would be evaluation and candidate moves. Could you explain what you mean? Again, some listeners will be familiar, but as you see it, how they fit in?
Absolutely. So evaluation is the process by which you determine who is better in the position. Maybe it's equal, maybe you might be winning or even losing, who knows, right? But evaluation is always the starting point of another process which is called the candidate move selection. Meaning that if you know what the position demands from you, like how to evaluate it, essentially you also know what you're supposed to do in this very position if you want to carry on and play some logical chess. And this word logical, I used it for a reason, namely because there needs to be this logical link. Again, I'm introducing some new phrases here and there. So this logical link between the evaluation of the position and the candidate moves that you choose to analyze before you elect one of them and execute it on the board. Yeah. So one, maybe not a misconception, but one piece of advice that I would hear all the time from different students of mine even, would be to use the CCTV type of a method when determining a list of candidate moves. CCTV is an acronym that stands for checks, captures, threats, and now I know that the V pertains to vulnerabilities. I didn't know that previously.
I was wondering too as soon as you said it.
I had no idea, to be honest. I thought vision, but it would make no sense, essentially, since captures, checks, and threats are so much more concrete than vision as such. In any case, this is a very nice type of a method when to use when beginning to analyze any kind of position that pops up in front of you in a game of chess. However, in my personal opinion, only from the point of view of a tactical check of a given position. So you just want to make sure that if you play a given move, that you have in mind that you examine all the checks, all the threats, and all the captures that your opponent can do against you, just to make sure that you're not losing immediately as a result of the move that you intend to play being played on the board. But also, the moves that are most forcing typically need to be examined first from among the ones that are included in your candidate move list. Yeah, so that is what many people emphasize, many coaches, that the CCTV method helps a lot, but it helps avoiding tactical pitfalls, some kind of tactical mishaps, I guess. However, I put more emphasis on this kind of connection between the evaluation process and the moves that you're supposed to consider in the first place as candidates. Because if, let's say, the position is closed in nature and you're down on material quite severely, well, you're going to be immediately looking for moves that sharpen up the play, open up the position, right? Those kind of moves. Logically speaking, there's a huge probability that moves that maintain the status quo in such a situation, they're gonna fail. Because on the lower level, players often struggle in even electing a candidate move, like creating a list of candidate moves, since they do not even know what they're looking for. So if you do not know what you're looking for, how can you even find it, right?
Yeah, there's so much information in everything you say, Wojciech, that there's a lot to process. So for listeners, I would definitely, again, recommend you dig into the course for an even more granular look. So moving on from evaluation and candidate moves, the next element that you highlight, and I think this one is important, is the difference between elimination and comparison.
That is true. Well, because if you think about the construction of the calculation process, once you've elected a list of candidate moves, you need to first make sure that it's not short enough. So the rule of thumb says always at least 2 candidates, because you definitely want to avoid falling into something that we call tunnel vision. On the other hand, the list of your candidate moves cannot be excessively long, because it could imply that you kind of do not know what you're looking for if your list of candidates is like 5, 6, 7 items long. So let's assume you elected 3 to 4 candidates that you want to choose from. So how to decide which one is the best? So you need to learn how to separate the wheat from the chaff, meaning that you need to use comparison and elimination. So those are 2 closely related methods of getting like closer to the truth about which move is best in the given position. But there's a subtle difference between the 2 of them. Namely, comparison can be used if the 2 moves that you are like trying to decide between, that you're trying to figure out which one of them is better, if they have something similar in nature. Namely, both of the moves, I know there are threats against the king of the opponent, or maybe both of the moves are moves that happen geographically on the same part of the board, like close to one another, like not queen c6, but queen d6, for example, instead, right? While elimination is more general in nature, it serves its purpose quite well if your list of candidate moves is longer, because many of those moves, they may be logical. On the other hand, you will be able to determine rather quickly that, like at least 2 of them out of 5, they lose on the spot because you're dropping material if you execute any of them. So let's say your initial list of candidate moves was 5 moves long. All of a sudden, 2 of them lose outright tactically. Another 2 make no sense compared to like one that looks best in terms of comparison being used. And all of a sudden, you're left with one move, which you simply need to start calculating. And this brings us to like the 4th pillar of my training method, obviously.
Yes, and the 4th pillar is forced lines and intermediate moves.
Exactly, because some of those moves, when you start analyzing them, they can actually show some forced nature, meaning that they're going to lead you straight into a variation filled with moves that are only moves. And how to define only moves? Only moves can be like only because they're the only legal moves available in the given position, or maybe just because at the end of the day, everything else along the way just fails, just loses. And as you're calculating a forced line like this, you might accidentally also stumble on an intermediate move, a move which sort of wrecks the forced nature of the line, since it's typically a surprise move, something that barely anybody anticipated up front. But it's also a move that typically introduces yet another branching moment. And now it's time for me to define branching, on the other hand. So branching is like a situation in which you once again have many candidate moves at your disposal. Typically, this is connected with this kind of situation in which the position becomes less tactical, less forcing for any reason whatsoever. It's just, again, that you need to like start the process from scratch, do an eval of the position once again, then, go through comparison and elimination, and then once again, you go into the details. But this is a moment which like changes everything. And it also proves that like the existence of intermediate moves proves along the way that calculation, contrary to common belief, is not a linear process. It's not that you go like through this whole calculation process, which I've been explaining so far, and you reach the end and you're done. It's rather that very often you're going to be moving back and forth between those pillars, those stages of the calculation process, until you make it till the end, because and very often we do not make it till the very end because the position is so complex, or maybe it's just that we do not have so much time left on the clock to think about it anymore.
Yeah. And one problem that I think is maybe less common at your level, but very common for club players, Wojciech, is you might reach a position where you're kind of at the end of the forcing sequence. You're fairly confident that the smoke has cleared, and maybe you're up material, maybe you're not. But often you might reach a point where the problem is you're having trouble evaluating the position, the final position. So then you've got to compare it to another one that you also don't know how to evaluate. So this is another case where the answer might just be practice. But do you have any advice for people when they find themselves in that situation?
Yeah, so it sounds like a story of my life. I just yesterday I played a game like this, and I thought that the ensuing endgame should be winning for me based on general considerations. Well, I was wrong. So it was a draw at the end of the day. I was a little bit upset about this, but this was a type of a mistake that I wasn't able to, objectively speaking, avoid, since, well, nobody would have been able, I guess, to calculate through the maze of variations, even if the endgame was relatively simple in terms of like the material present on the board, because this was like a bishop and some pawns against a knight and pawns. But what really needs to be explained before I answer this question is the fact that evaluation works like a boomerang within the calculation process, because we need to start calculating the position by evaluating it first, but also towards the end of every calculated line, evaluation comes back to us, because we need to evaluate what we come across, as we've already reached the end of the road, so to speak. So we're like 5 moves ahead in our calculation process. We've reached the type of a position which is still imbalanced. And there's always this kind of a moment, as you said in the beginning of this podcast, that we simply need to stop. We need to say, okay, like this is where I stop, and this is exactly where this is the moment based on which I'm gonna be, making up my mind whether I want to pursue this idea or maybe not at all. So one thing that definitely needs to be avoided in such situations is trying to calculate beyond this point of time, right? So there are so many players who fall into, even on a higher level, I call this phenomenon analysis paralysis. So they're typically not so confident as just players. They want to have everything figured out before they decide in favor of a given move, whereas sometimes it's simply not possible. And if you think about like the calculation process as going for a walk into the forest, the deeper you go into the forest, the more trees you see. So at a certain point of time, you're just supposed to stop counting the trees or calculating moves, right? Because it's inevitable. You're going to get lost within the maze of variations. It's very important to strike a fine balance between accuracy and depth, especially if you take into consideration the fact that with every single move that you calculate beyond move 3 or 4, that's more or less this kind of threshold that I managed to determine throughout the course of years, at least based on the experiences of my students. Beyond move 3 or 4, the calculation, the vision of ours, as well as the calculated variations, they get a little bit hazy, right? And all of a sudden the accuracy drops, meaning that we cannot really trust ourselves, our skills in this respect anymore beyond that point of time. Better to calculate those lines in chunks, as I say. So 3 moves here, 3 moves there, another 3 moves here, right? And essentially 3 moves are like this kind of distance of calculation is achievable for just about anybody, in my personal opinion, while 4, 5, 6 going beyond, first of all, it's barely ever going to be happening in your tournament games, that you need to calculate like 6 moves ahead, otherwise you lose, right? And typically what I do, I try to calculate 2-3 moves ahead on a regular basis, like a computer program running in the background of an operating system, making sure just that it doesn't crash. And I do use this comparison in my course as well in the introduction. Okay.
And the 5th element is find the mistake exercises, which you also have a section on in your course.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive because if you enter a forced line and even if there are some intermediate moves along the way, well, essentially you reach the end of the road. You either play the move or you don't. And what is there else left to be talked about in this context? Well, namely, what I've noticed when during the years of playing myself, but also coaching others, is that a type of a skill that everybody would surely want to have is the ability to recognize critical moments in the game. Because, those are situations in which the price of a mistake increases. So if you're right in the winning position, you're going to bring the full point home. If you falter, well, you lose your advantage. If you were equal and you commit a mistake, you essentially lose the game, as opposed to those parts of the game, like an average game of chess is 40 to 50 moves long. So most of the time you're going to be just doing business as usual, as they say, just playing moves, that make sense, etc. But statistically speaking, once or twice per game, there are going to be those kind of moments when you either play the best move in the position or you simply don't, and then all of a sudden things go pretty much south. So this ability is hyper important for every chess player. It's like this proverbial pat on the shoulder being given by a smarter advisor who tells you like, hey, Wojciech, this is the moment when you need to focus the most, right? There is something in this position. And I guess that if I had this kind of advisor in every single game of mine, my rating would have been much higher than it is right now. That's for sure. And this applies to just about every single player in the world. I think it was even Magnus Carlsen himself. I'm not so sure about this, but I could have sworn that I heard an interview once with him where he said, well, if he was supposed to get some outer assistance from somebody, he doesn't need the moves. He just needs this pat on the shoulder, like, hey, this is the moment, focus here, because if you play the best move here and there is something available for sure, you're gonna handle it, you're gonna win. And easier said than done, because everybody wants a skill like this, but how to acquire it? You need the proper training method. And in my opinion, the best thing that you can do in this respect is using those find the mistake exercises who were, I think, pioneered to a certain degree by the late Mark Dvoretsky. I'm saying pioneered because it's I wouldn't call it an invention, right? It's just that the first time I ever came across a type of a puzzle like that was exactly when I studied his works from the 90s, from the 80s, and it's not such a popular training method, by the way, but it's invaluable, since when you think about it, puzzles, like regular puzzles, they tend to bias you already into thinking that, well, that's exactly the moment where I need to focus, so things are immediately twice as easy as they would have been if it was an element of a longer game of yours. Sorry. Whereas if you have a fragment of the game, and within that fragment there is some sort of a resource, some kind of a critical moment hidden, which you first need to locate. So you need to analyze a couple of positions in a row before you get there, and then only you need to figure out whether this is indeed the case and find the move and confirm it. That's a completely different level of chess training.
Yeah, and this is something, so I have a Chessable course for much lower rated players, primarily. I mean, some of the exercises can be challenging, but it's primarily 1,000 to 1,500 level. And I keyed on a certain thing, for the same thing, Wojciech, where I showed positions and had a player guess. And there's always going to be some sort of, it's as much art as science, if you're going to judge and say, this is a critical moment, this isn't a critical moment, this is a critical moment. But with the advent of engines, obviously, you can see when one move really turns the tables, really swings the equity that a player has within a given position. So it's a skill that I try to work on as well. But of course, it's so much harder when you're playing. I haven't been playing much, and I talked about this in the prior podcast with Nate Solon. But I was just in a tournament, and I knew when the critical moment was there, but guess what? I had mismanaged my time prior to that. So it doesn't help that much, So it's only a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I can imagine that happening very often. But also, It's such a difficult skill, or maybe such a difficult thing to figure out during like practical games of ours, that some authors even claim that it is virtually impossible to determine, like on an ex ante basis, whether
Right.
you're dealing with a critical moment or not. You only kind of get to learn it. You only get to understand it ex post, in the postmortem, when you
Right.
analyze the game. And well, actually, it turned out that this was such a moment. I should have focused twice, and maybe I should have spent more time on the clock pondering over this position. However, I would object to this viewpoint. I think that, as you said yourself, you had this game where you knew that something has to be there. Simply, it's just that maybe it was like a little bit too difficult. Maybe like this resource was additionally hidden. So like the gut feeling was already priceless. It's like
Right.
like a priceless skill to have, but you still need to turn it into, like, you still need to convert it into a full point. You still need to figure it out, like what happens next, right? And it must have been particularly frustrating, I guess, that you know that this is the right moment, but it's just difficult to extract the truth from it.
Yeah, it definitely frustrating. And I hadn't played for many months, and that goes into it for sure, but it doesn't make it any less troublesome, any less irritating. But so you mentioned, as you mentioned in our conversation, and you also mentioned in the course, the profound legacy of IM Mark Dvoretsky and the impact that he had. But we actually have a listener question, Wojciech, from another legendary trainer, and this is from Brian Karen of the Facebook. I always mess up the name. The Facebook Chessbook Collectors Group, which anyone who's on Facebook should join if you want to nerd out about chess books. And Brian asks, he says, are you familiar with Josef Dorfman's work, particularly The Method in Chess, where he also discusses statics and dynamics, because this is a theme of one of Wojciech's books? If so, what are your thoughts on his approach, both its strengths and weaknesses? And has his work influenced your own understanding or teaching of these concepts?
Yes. So it's an all-time classic. Obviously, I think that Josef Dorfman was one of the first authors ever to have discussed statics and dynamics in much more detail. I mean, it's my opinion, obviously, like what the book was all about. It was all about creating a method that would allow any player to figure out what the position calls for in terms of exactly like static and dynamic solutions. As far as I remember, it was all about 4 key elements that the player was supposed to pay attention to in critical moments, namely safety of the king, like that was the first one. Then we had material. Also, what was supposed to be taken into consideration was the trade of queens and the impact thereof on the evaluation of the position. And finally, I think it was the structure. So we have like 2 static elements and 2 dynamic elements that needed to be taken into consideration. Then what was supposed to be done was some sort of an artificial equation, in the sense that like what speaks in favor of this solution, what speaks in favor of the other one. And finally, there was also this caveat that some of those elements were more important than others, as far as I remember. So as far as I can tell, the safety of the king would prevail, would kind of override the structure, right? So when I was writing Supreme Chess Understanding Statics and Dynamics, obviously I was familiar with this work. I studied it some 15 years ago, since it was published at the beginning of this millennium, as far as I can tell. And as much as I enjoyed the book, I enjoyed the examples. They were like really, really, really instructive that were contained in it. The problem that I have with this method is that it is, in my personal opinion, impossible to create a universal method which is going to solve every single problem that you get on the board, even in terms of, strictly speaking, statics and dynamics, because you will be able to find like 1,000 puzzles which you can solve exactly based on this method, but you're also going to be able to find another 1,000 examples which fail somewhere along the way and undermine the whole logic. The logic sounds very good. Then again, what's the difference between theory and practice? $1 million, essentially.
Right.
That's the difference. Yeah. So what I want to say by this is that when I was working on Supreme Chess Understanding, I immediately said this in the introduction, actually, that in my personal opinion, there is no such thing as a universal method of determining whether we need to play statically or dynamically. But there are some guidelines and principles. Principles being like much stronger guidelines, I guess. So there are some rules that are very likely to work for us if like specific circumstances on the board kick in. So for example, if you're down on material and you do not want to lose without a fight, you probably need to stir up things on the board, generate some tactical counterplay, some kind of a tactical skirmish, maybe. Whereas if you're up in terms of material, well, what do you need to do? Well, essentially you need to just, like smoothly sail towards the end, trade off pieces. You're not supposed to mind simplification, etc. And you're supposed to make sure that whenever your opponent tries to wiggle, you're gonna immediately, kind of cool him down if you only manage to achieve this, right? Then again, the problem with any kind of method of evaluating such factors lies exactly in the essence of evaluation as a process as such. Because many people believe that if you want to evaluate a position correctly, you do want to take like the structure into consideration, king safety, I don't know, like different kind of things, and you like assign equal weight, like an equal weight to all of those elements. Let's say you've got 10 elements that you decide that you need to analyze before you consider a given move in a given position, and then you do like, okay, 10% for this, 10% for that. You start adding those percents to your stack. And then you choose the move that, like gains like the highest score from among those elements. Whereas in the reality, there are some positions in which one of those elements is going to be 100% and all the others are 0. And this is why, in my personal opinion, all of those methods are not really bound to fail. It's just that they cannot claim any kind of degree of universality. Just if we treat them as guidelines and some sort of principles maybe from time to time also, that's the best usage of those methods that I can possibly imagine. So in my previous book, the one statement that I made in the very beginning is exactly that the readers are going to get loads of advice on how to choose between static and dynamic elements and factors in their games. Then again, they cannot possibly expect me to indicate a clear-cut decision-making method in this regard, since in my personal opinion, it simply doesn't exist.
Yeah, that makes sense. We all want like that universal shortcut, that universal explainer that just allows us to sort everything neatly. But chess is too complicated at the end of the day, no matter what system you're trying to develop. And Wojciech, this has been great. Again, recommend that listeners check out your course. And as we wrap up, I was just curious. So I was checking your FIDE page. It looks like you're managing to play in league games a few times a year. Is that right?
That is true. Well, actually, I'm a father of 2 already. The last time we met, I think I was still a father of 1. I'm not so sure about it because it's been a long time.
It's May 2023, the last one.
23. So no, my son was already okay with us back then. But the first time we met, I think that he wasn't even in the plans, I guess.
Right.
No, but seriously, if you're like a family man, father of 2, married, and you're also coaching others, it means that you do have to manage your time adequately. So I do try to play at least those 30 rated games per year. Most of the time that I spend with chess is, however, devoted to my students. If I manage to squeeze in a book or a course or 2, like every 2 or 3 years, I'm always particularly happy. But that's just about it. That's the most I can do, since like the day is not made of rubber. You cannot kind of stretch for 24 hours into 30. I'm afraid. Although I wish this would have been possible, obviously.
Yeah. And with so many varying responsibilities, like what's a typical day for you like? Is it primarily working with individual students or group work or what?
I only do individual training. I currently sit something between 15 to 20 students of a varying playing strength, between, as said, like 1,500 all the way to 20, more or less 2,700. Obviously, those players, depending on their playing strength, they demand different kind of solutions, different kind of ideas, files, different pieces of homework as well from me naturally. But it's always like a very nice experience to like see chess from different angles, because it's very easy to fall for something that's called the curse of knowledge, that let's assume you're 2,600 rated and you assume that everybody else surrounding you is also 2,600 rated, that like problems of like 1,500 rated players for all of a sudden do not exist. So it kind of allows me to like the possibility to train also with lower rated players allows me to like keep my point of view like as broad as possible. I mean, the point of view on chess and chess training. So obviously I'm going to be doing between like up to 3 or 4 hours of training with others per day. And this leaves me with a couple of hours to train myself. I also have my own ambitions. The last thing that I have on my own personal bucket list is an Olympic medal. It's going to be very difficult to get one, since the competition on the Polish national team is pretty strong. We've got a lot of talented players coming up, and like those, especially those youngsters. I could mention Jan Klimkowski, who is a teammate of mine at the German Bundesliga team from Berlin. Some of the viewers might know him already from the Gukash Ding World Championship match, after which the current world champion announced his like the list of people who've been helping him. And if you have such an entry in your chess CV as a 16-year-old, I don't know what is else there to be gained. Only the world championship title for him one day, and this is what I wish for him, obviously. And also, if I have like a second of time left between family duties and other things, obviously I'm gonna write a chapter or two of a book or something. If I'm writing a course, then obviously I try to do it, I try to spend like maybe 15 to 30 minutes per day on some writing activities, so that, eventually after a couple of years, I manage to produce a piece or two. That is how it works on my side. But one thing is for sure, when my children were born, I really needed to learn how to manage my time perfectly, like optimize all the processes, throw away the things that are like time consuming and not really productive. And all of a sudden you get the impression that time flies very, very quickly. And as we said in the beginning, before we tuned in, well, I do not measure time anymore in years, days, or whatever. I measure time judging by how my kids are growing up.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I can barely catch up. They're growing up so fast.
Yep, and it only gets faster. Wojciech, as a father of a 11 and an 8-year-old, it's staggering, but worthwhile for sure. But definitely best decision I've ever made. So Wojciech, are you still up for recording a separate short video looking at a few of the puzzles you sent me?
Definitely.
Okay, so for listeners, you'll have to check out the YouTube channel to see that. We're gonna record that now and post it when I post this interview. So a little actual chess content with actual diagrams rather than just talk. But for those of you listening or watching this podcast, I guess we will say goodbye. And thanks as always, Wojciech, and congrats on the course called Calculate Like a Beast, the Moranda Method. Definitely recommend that you ambitious players listening could definitely benefit from it. So thank you, Wojciech.
Thank you very much to you, and thank you very much for the listeners and the viewers for watching.